The year was 632 CE. In the heart of the Arabian desert, in the city of Medina, the Prophet Muhammad drew his last breath. His death was not just the passing of a man, it was the end of an era, a moment that would send shockwaves through the community he had built from the ground up. The people who had followed him, who had left their homes and risked their lives for his message of one God, were now lost. They were like a ship without a captain, adrift in a vast and uncertain sea. Who would guide them now? Who would lead the faithful and protect the fragile new world of Islam? This was the question that hung heavy in the air, a silence more deafening than any cry of grief. This question of succession was not a simple matter of choosing a new leader. It was about the very soul of their community. Was the leadership a political office to be decided by the most respected members of the community, or was it a spiritual inheritance passed down through the Prophet's own bloodline? The Prophet himself had not left a clear written instruction, or at least none that everyone agreed upon. His final days were a blur of sickness and sorrow, leaving his followers to interpret his words and actions. The companions who had stood by his side, who had heard his teachings firsthand, now found themselves facing a decision that would shape the future of their faith for centuries to come. In the immediate aftermath of his death, while his closest family, including his cousin and son-in-law Ali, were busy with the sacred rites of washing and preparing his body for burial, a different kind of meeting was taking place elsewhere in Medina. A group of the Prophet's most influential companions gathered to settle the matter of leadership. They were anxious, knowing that without a strong hand to guide them, the tribes that had only recently united under the banner of Islam could easily fracture and fall back into old rivalries. Their decision had to be made quickly, decisively, to prevent chaos from consuming them all. This hurried meeting would become the first fork in the road. The men who gathered that day believed they were acting in the best interest of the community, or ummah. They felt the weight of responsibility on their shoulders. They needed a leader who was wise, respected, and had been close to the Prophet. They chose one of their own, Abu Bakr, a loyal friend and one of the very first converts to Islam. He was a father-in-law to the Prophet and a man known for his calm and steady leadership. For many, this seemed like the logical, practical choice. But for others, this decision, made while the Prophet's family was still in mourning, felt like a betrayal. It was a choice that bypassed the one they believed the Prophet himself had designated. The group that supported the choice of Abu Bakr would eventually come to be known as the Sunnis. The word Sunni comes from Sunnah, which means the path or tradition of the Prophet. For them, the most important thing was to follow the example set by Muhammad in all aspects of life, including how the community should govern itself. They believed that the Prophet, in his wisdom, had intentionally left the choice of a successor to the community itself. He had trusted his followers to use their collective judgment, their consensus, to pick the best person for the job. This idea of community consensus, or ijma, became a cornerstone of Sunni political thought. The Sunnis, who today make up the vast majority of Muslims in Pakistan and around the world, saw Abu Bakr as the rightful first caliph, a title meaning successor or deputy. They believed his leadership was legitimized by the pledge of allegiance he received from the most important companions. After Abu Bakr, they accepted the leadership of 3 more caliphs in succession. Media group, portraits or statues of 4 caliphs, historical manuscripts with names of Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman and Ali, group of actors in caliph attire at stock at distribute _ Umar, Uthman and finally Ali ibn Abi Talib. These 4 are known in Sunni tradition as the Rashidun, or the rightly guided caliphs. Their rule is seen as a golden age, a time when leaders were chosen based on merit, piety and their closeness to the Prophet's teachings, not on family ties. This belief system emphasizes the importance of the community as a whole. No single person after the Prophet was believed to possess divine or infallible knowledge. The caliph was a political and military leader, but also a spiritual guide who was expected to rule according to Islamic law, or Sharia, which is derived from the Quran and the Sunnah. The community had a duty to obey him, but also a right to advise him, and in extreme cases to depose him if he strayed from the righteous path. The authority therefore rested with the law and the community that upheld it. not with one individual's bloodline. This perspective on leadership created a particular kind of religious and political structure. It allowed for a degree of flexibility as the community could adapt to new challenges by choosing the most capable leader for the times. It established a tradition where the collective wisdom of learned scholars, the ulama, would interpret the law and guide the rulers. For Sunnis, the story of early Islam is a story of a community successfully navigating its first and greatest crisis. They believe they preserved the unity of the faith by following the practical example of the Prophet and his closest companions, ensuring that Islam could spread and flourish under stable, community-approved leadership. On the other side of this divide were those who would become known as the Shia. The name Shia is a shortened form of Shiat Ali, which means the partisans or followers of Ali. For this group, the question of leadership was not a political problem to be solved by a committee. It was a matter of divine appointment. They believed that the Prophet Muhammad had, in fact, designated a successor before his death. They pointed to several instances, most famously an event at a place called Ghadir Kum, where they believe the Prophet took Ali's hand and declared, "He of whom I am the master, Ali is also his master." For the Shia, this was a clear and undeniable appointment. Ali was not just any companion, he was family. He was the Prophet's first cousin, the husband of his beloved daughter Fatima, and the father of his only grandsons Hassan and Hussein. He was among the first to accept Islam and was renowned for his courage, wisdom, and deep knowledge of the faith. The Shia believed that just as God had chosen Muhammad to be a prophet, God had also chosen Ali and his descendants to be the spiritual and political guides, or imams, for the Muslim community. This leadership, they argued, was a sacred trust that could only be passed down through the Prophet's bloodline, the Ahl al-Bayt, or people of the house. This belief meant that the first three caliphs accepted by the Sunnis, Abu Bakr, Umar and Uthman, were seen by the Shia as illegitimate usurpers. They believed these men had wrongfully taken a position that belonged to Ali. While Ali did eventually become the fourth caliph, his rule was plagued by conflict and war, culminating in his assassination. For the Shia, his tragic story and the later martyrdom of his son Hussein at the Battle of Karbala became central to their identity. These events were seen as proof of the injustice suffered by the Prophet's true heirs and cemented a narrative of righteous struggle against tyranny. The Shia concept of the Imam is fundamentally different from the Sunni concept of the Caliph. The Imam is not just a political leader, he is believed to be divinely inspired and infallible, a perfect interpreter of the Quran and the Prophet's teachings. He is a spiritual guide who holds a special, esoteric knowledge passed down from the Prophet himself. This belief in a divinely ordained hereditary leadership created a distinct spiritual and political path. It fostered a deep emotional connection to the family of the Prophet and a sense of history shaped by tragedy, patience, and the awaiting of justice. This path was not about community consensus, but about loyalty to God's chosen guides. The initial disagreement over leadership did not immediately split the Muslim world into two warring camps. In the beginning, it was more of a political dispute, a difference of opinion among the Prophet's companions. Those who favored Ali expressed their disappointment, but for the sake of unity, did not openly rebel against the rule of the first caliphs. Ali himself, after some initial hesitation, gave his pledge of allegiance to Abu Bakr, Umar, and Uthman, choosing to act as an advisor rather than a rival. The early Muslim community, despite its internal tensions, managed to hold together, expanding its reach and spreading its message with incredible speed and success. However, the underlying tensions festered. The cracks began to widen during the reign of the third caliph, Uthman. He was accused of favoring his own clan, the Umayyads, in appointments to powerful positions, leading to widespread discontent. This discontent boiled over into open rebellion, and Uthman was assassinated in his own home. It was in the chaotic aftermath of his death that Ali was finally acclaimed as the fourth caliph, but his caliphate was born in turmoil. He was immediately challenged by powerful rivals, including Uthman's kinsman Muawiyah, the governor of Syria, who demanded justice for Uthman's murder and refused to recognize Ali's authority. This led to the first civil war in Islam, the Battle of Siffin. It pitted Ali's army against Muawiyah's army. The conflict was a tragedy, as the companions of the Prophet and their followers fought against one another. The battle ended inconclusively when Muawiyah's forces, on the verge of defeat, attached pages of the Quran to their lances, calling for arbitration. Ali's decision to accept arbitration fractured his own support, with a radical group known as the Kharijites breaking away, believing that judgment belongs to God alone. It was one of these Kharijites who would later assassinate Ali, ending his short and troubled rule. The death of Ali and the subsequent rise of the Umayyad dynasty under Muawiyah marked a decisive turning point. The caliphate became a hereditary monarchy, passed down through the Umayyad family. This solidified the political and religious split. For the Sunnis, this was a political reality they had to accept for the sake of stability. For the Shia, it was the ultimate betrayal of the Prophet's legacy. The event that seared this division into the collective memory of the Shia was the massacre at Karbala in 680 CE, where Ali's son Hussein and his small band of followers were brutally killed by the Umayyad army. This martyrdom became the defining story of Shia Islam, a symbol of sacrifice for justice against overwhelming odds. Despite the deep historical chasm that separates them, it is crucial to understand that Shia and Sunni Muslims have far more in common than what divides them. The conflict is not over the core tenets of the faith, but over a historical and political disagreement that has been magnified over centuries. Both groups are branches of the same tree, with roots firmly planted in the same soil. They worship the same God, Allah, the one and only Creator. The concept of, or the oneness of God, is the absolute foundation of Islam for both Sunnis and Shias, a belief that unites them in the most fundamental way. Furthermore, both traditions revere the Prophet Muhammad as the final messenger of God. They follow his teachings and strive to emulate his life as the perfect human example. The holy book for both is the Quran. They believe it to be the literal word of God, revealed to the Prophet Muhammad through the angel Gabriel. While interpretations of certain verses may differ, especially those related to leadership, the text itself is universally accepted and cherished. The Quran is the ultimate source of guidance, law, and inspiration for all Muslims, regardless of their sectarian affiliation. This shared scripture is a powerful, unbreakable bond. The practical pillars of the faith are also largely the same. Both Sunnis and Shias adhere to the 5 pillars of Islam, which form the framework of a Muslim's life. They both perform the daily prayers, or give to charity, known as fast during the holy month of Ramadan called, and aspire to make the pilgrimage to Mecca, or at least once in their lifetime if they are able. While there may be minor differences in the specific rituals, such as how they hold their hands during prayer, or the exact timing for breaking the fast, the essential acts of worship are identical in spirit and purpose, connecting millions in a shared rhythm of devotion. Beyond these core beliefs and practices, both groups share a common history, a rich cultural heritage, and a deep respect for the early figures of Islam, even if they view their roles differently. Great Islamic civilizations, known for their contributions to science, art, and philosophy, were built by both Sunnis and Shias working together. They face many of the same challenges in the modern world, from Islamophobia to poverty and political instability. Recognizing this vast common ground is the first step toward bridging the divide. The conflict is not an eternal theological war, it is a family feud born of grief and power that has been allowed to fester for far too long. To understand how this ancient schism plays out in the modern world, we need only look to places like the Kurram district in Pakistan. Tucked away in the rugged mountains of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, bordering Afghanistan, Kurram is a place of stunning beauty and, honestly, heartbreaking violence. It has a unique demographic makeup that sets it apart from the rest of Sunni-majority Pakistan. The upper part of the district is predominantly inhabited by the Turi tribe, who are devout Shia Muslims, while the lower and central parts are home to various Sunni tribes. This sectarian geography has turned Kurram into a recurring flashpoint for conflict. The history of Kurram is a story of tribal rivalries that have become intertwined with religious identity. For generations, disputes over land, water rights, and control of smuggling routes have flared up between the tribes. However, over the past few decades, these local conflicts have taken on a much sharper and more dangerous sectarian edge. The 1979 Islamic Revolution in Shia Iran and the subsequent anti-Soviet jihad in neighboring Afghanistan, funded by Sunni Saudi Arabia and the West, poured fuel on the fire. Both sides of the global Shia-Sunni proxy war found fertile ground for influence in Qurram, transforming local grievances into a battleground for larger geopolitical struggles. The district's strategic location makes it particularly volatile. The main road that runs through the valley, connecting Pakistan to Afghanistan, is a vital artery for trade and travel. Control of this road means power and money. For years, Shia communities in Upper Qurram have faced blockades by Sunni militants, cutting them off from the rest of Pakistan and leading to severe shortages of food, medicine, and other essential supplies. This tactic of collective punishment has created a siege mentality and deepened the sense of persecution among the Shia population, making them more determined to defend their land and identity. The governance of the area has also been a major factor. Until 2018, Qurram was part of the semi-autonomous, federally administered tribal areas, governed by a colonial-era legal system that often left communities to fend for themselves. The merger of Fatah with Khyber Pakhtunkhwa was meant to bring stability and development, but the transition has been, well, slow and difficult. The state's authority is weak, and militant groups, including factions of the Pakistani Taliban and Al-Qaeda, have long used the remote, mountainous terrain as a safe haven. These groups actively promote a violent anti-Shia ideology, exploiting local disputes to advance their own brutal agendas. The simmering tensions in Qurram erupted into a full-blown crisis in late 2024. The violence was not a sudden explosion, but the culmination of a year marked by escalating clashes. Throughout the summer and autumn, disputes over land had repeatedly turned deadly, with dozens killed in tit-for-tat attacks. The main highway was shut down. Ceasefires were brokered by tribal elders only to be broken within days, and a sense of dread settled over the valley. The residents knew that a much larger confrontation was looming, like a storm gathering behind the mountains. The storm broke on November 21, 2024. Gunmen ambushed several convoys of Shia civilians who were traveling under police escort. The attackers showed no mercy. They sprayed the vehicles with bullets, targeting men, women, and children indiscriminately. In a matter of hours, over 40 people were dead. The news of the massacre spread like wildfire, igniting a furious and violent response. Enraged Shia residents launched revenge attacks against Sunni communities, and the district descended into a spiral of sectarian warfare. The ancient feud was once again being written in blood. For 3 terrifying days, the valley was a war zone. The official death toll quickly climbed to over 80 people, with more than 150 injured. The real numbers were likely higher, as many families buried their dead without reporting them to the authorities. Hundreds of people, fearing for their lives, fled their homes and sought refuge in the cold, unforgiving mountains with little more than the clothes on their backs. Mosques were attacked, homes were burned, and the social fabric of the district, already frayed, was ripped apart. The violence prompted protests in major cities like Karachi and Lahore, as citizens demanded an end to the sectarian madness. After days of intense negotiations involving government officials, military leaders, and tribal elders from both sides, a fragile 7-day ceasefire was finally agreed upon on November 24th. The terms were grimly practical: an exchange of prisoners and the return of the dead for proper burial. The ceasefire brought a temporary halt to the fighting, but it did little to address the root causes of the conflict. For the people of Qurram, it was a brief respite in a long and painful history of violence. The ceasefire was a pause, not a peace, leaving behind a legacy of trauma, mistrust, and a burning desire for revenge that could easily ignite again. While the conflict in Qurram is often framed as a purely religious war between Shias and Sunnis, The reality on the ground is far more complex. Religion provides the identity and the justification, but the triggers for violence are often rooted in more worldly matters: land, resources, and power. For generations, the tribes of Kurum have competed for control of fertile agricultural land, precious water sources, and the forests that cover the mountainsides. These are not abstract theological disputes, they are life and death struggles for survival and prosperity in a harsh and unforgiving environment. The weak presence of the state has created a power vacuum that is filled by tribal law and increasingly by armed groups. In many parts of the district, a person's security depends not on the police or the army, but on the strength of their tribe and its ability to defend its territory. In this environment, an insult to one person can become an insult to the entire tribe, and a dispute over a small plot of land can escalate into a full-scale battle. The sectarian identities of Shia and Sunni become banners under which these tribal armies rally, transforming local feuds into holy causes and making compromise almost impossible. This volatile mix is made even more explosive by the presence of extremist militant groups. The rugged terrain along the Afghan border has long served as a sanctuary for organizations like the Pakistani Taliban and Al-Qaeda. These groups adhere to a rigid and violent ideology that considers Shia Muslims to be heretics and apostates who must be eliminated. They actively seek to provoke sectarian conflict as it helps them recruit new members, destabilize the government, and impose their own brutal version of Islamic law. They often act as instigators, carrying out attacks like the convoy ambush in November 2024 to trigger a cycle of retaliation that serves their strategic goals. The persecution is not limited to Muslims. The climate of intolerance and violence created by this conflict makes life extremely dangerous for the small religious minorities who live in the area, such as Christians. For them, the simple act of sharing their faith can be a death sentence, not necessarily from the state, but from the powerful militant and tribal groups that operate with impunity. They are forced to practice their beliefs in secret, living in constant fear. The story of Kurum is a stark reminder that when sectarianism takes root, it poisons the entire society, and the conflict, while fought under the banner of Islam, ultimately becomes a struggle for power where the most extreme and violent voices prevail. In the midst of the smoke, the anger, and the grief, it is easy to forget the fundamental truth that lies at the heart of this story. The men and women who identify as Sunni and Shia in places like Kurum are not followers of two different religions. They are followers of Islam. They believe in Allah, the merciful and compassionate. They believe in the finality of his prophet Muhammad. They turn to the same holy book, the Quran, for solace and guidance. They share a spiritual heritage that is far deeper and more profound than the political divisions that have torn them apart. The tragedy of the Shia-Sunni conflict is not that they believe in different things, but that they have allowed a disagreement over history to define their present and poison their future. The initial question of who should have led the community 14 centuries ago has been manipulated by political actors, amplified by extremist ideologies, and exploited by those who profit from division and chaos. The blood that is shed in Kurum is not shed for God. It is shed for land, for power, and for old grievances that have been passed down from one generation to the next, each time gathering more bitterness and sorrow. The path to peace is not about one side converting the other or forcing them to abandon their historical narratives. It is about recognizing the humanity in one another and focusing on the vast ocean of shared beliefs rather than the narrow river of discord that runs between them. It is about community leaders, both Shia and Sunni, rejecting the extremists in their midst and declaring that the murder of a neighbor is not a holy act but a terrible sin. It requires a government strong enough to provide justice and security for all its citizens, regardless of their sect, and to disarm the militant groups that thrive on hatred. The story of the Shia and Sunni divide is a human story, a story of love for the Prophet, of grief at his passing, and of the difficult choices his followers had to make. It's a cautionary tale about how disagreements over power can fracture a community and leave wounds that last for centuries. But within that same story lies the hope for reconciliation. As long as both sides continue to pray to the same God, to follow the same prophet, and to read the same holy book, the ties that bind them will always be stronger than the conflicts that divide them. The challenge is to remember this, especially when the guns fall silent and the difficult work of living together begins again.